Beyond the gates, spoilers tease that a wedding is on the horizon, a moment of celebration taking place against the backdrop of turmoil and fractured loyalties within the Dupri family. What should have been a time of joy and healing becomes entangled in secrets, betrayals, and the lingering shadow of a disappearance that continues to haunt everyone tied to the family. The promise of vows exchanged and futures reshaped collides with choices that cannot be undone, and for those standing at the center of the storm, nothing will ever feel simple again. Ashley had not expected her heart to twist so sharply when she witnessed the kiss between Andre and Danny. It was a quiet moment, unplanned, hidden behind doors that were never meant to open. Yet to Ashley it felt like the world had split apart. Andre had been someone she allowed herself to test feelings with, to flirt and imagine what a new start might look like, but deep down she knew he was never more than a mirror to her doubts. Seeing him with Danny clarified everything. It was not jealousy she felt, but clarity. Andre was not the man she truly wanted, and the tenderness she once sought from him was only a distraction. Her certainty only deepened when the call came about Derek. A severe injury, sudden and brutal, had left him in a hospital bed, his body fighting to mend itself while his spirit hung in a fragile balance. Ashley rushed to his side, her own confusion dissolving into guilt and longing. Memories of their past together resurfaced. Moments of laughter and whispered promises they had once believed would last forever. Sitting by his bedside, she realized the truth that had been buried under hesitation. She loved him still, had perhaps never stopped loving him. And that test had delivered an answer she could not ignore. Days bled into nights as Ashley remained by Derek's side. She fed him when he was too weak to lift his arms, read to him when silence grew too heavy, and stayed awake through long, restless hours when pain kept him from sleep. Each moment revealed to her that indecision had no place left in her life. If she delayed, she might lose Derek forever, not just to injury, but to the distance her hesitations had already created. When Derek, voice strained and soft, asked her if she still saw a future for them, Ashley's tears gave him the only answer that mattered. She whispered her promise to marry him, to stay, to fight for them. Jan, Ashley's mother, nearly burst with relief when she heard the news. For so long she had watched her daughter drift between choices, afraid Ashley would lose herself chasing after the wrong people. Now, with Ashley's commitment to Derek secured, Jan saw hope not only for her daughter's happiness but for the stability of the family itself. She allowed herself to believe, if only briefly, that perhaps one corner of the Dupri circle would find peace. But the calm within Ashley's sphere contrasted sharply with the storm building elsewhere. Leslie had become a constant shadow, inserting herself into the Dupri family's private matters with little regard for boundaries. She thrived on being in the center of every conflict, treating every misstep of the Dupris as entertainment, almost as if their struggles validated her own bitterness. For Leslie, chaos was not only acceptable, it was preferable. She cloaked her intrusions as concern, but her satisfaction was impossible to disguise. Every setback for the Dupris, every hint of weakness, was fuel for her pride. Eva, caught in the web of her mother's behavior, felt the tension more deeply than anyone. She was ashamed of Leslie's dependence on the Dupri family's generosity and the way others whispered about them behind closed doors. Eva wanted peace, anonymity, a life free from suspicion and disdain, but Leslie thrived on provocation. Where Eva sought harmony, Leslie sought enemies. She was unafraid to declare anyone her rival if they dared to challenge her, and the more resistance she encountered, the bolder she became. For Eva, this was a nightmarish slow erosion of any chance at belonging. She watched her mother alienate more and more people, and though she longed to intervene, Leslie's sharp tongue and fearless arrogance always silenced her. While Ashley was making choices about her heart and Leslie sowed tension within the family, another current of fear swept through Danny. The disappearance of Chelsea remained a wound that refused to close. Each hour stretched into eternity as Danny pictured her daughter trapped, alone, and terrified. Her conversations with Bill became desperate pleas, her voice trembling with panic as she begged him to act. She could not live with the thought of losing Chelsea, and the uncertainty pressed on her chest until she could barely breathe. Bill, in his determination to calm Danny, drew closer to her than either of them intended. He carried her when grief left her too weak to stand, wrapped his arms around her when sobs shook her body, and whispered promises that they would bring Chelsea home. To him, it was compassion, a duty as a father and as someone who understood her pain. But beneath the surface, he felt something else stirring. Danny's vulnerability revealed a softer side to her, one he had never taken the time to notice before. She was fragile yet resilient, broken yet radiant. The warmth of her presence, even in despair, drew him in ways he knew were dangerous. When he finally brought Danny back to her home one night, her exhaustion pulling her toward collapse, Bill lingered too long in her company. He told himself it was only to make sure she was safe, but when his eyes met hers, the unspoken weight between them grew heavier. Danny, for her part, felt torn. The grief for Chelsea overshadowed everything else, but Bill's nearness comforted her, steadied her. She hated herself for noticing the strength of his jaw, the gentleness in his voice, the way his hand lingered on hers a second too long. She reminded herself again and again, he belonged to Haley. Crossing that line would unravel everything. Yet grief is a dangerous companion. It makes the boundaries of morality blur, makes what is forbidden feel inevitable. Danny whispered to herself in the darkness, praying she would not make a choice she could not take back. Bill, lying awake in his own home, wrestled with the same thought, knowing that one step further would mean a betrayal he could never explain. Meanwhile, whispers of the upcoming wedding between Ashley and Derek spread among the family, promising a celebration that might unite them all, if only briefly. Jan poured her energy into planning, determined that this wedding would shine as a beacon of hope, even if storms brewed in the distance. But the undercurrent of unease never faded. Everyone carried secrets, and the closer the wedding came, the heavier those secrets weighed. For Leslie, the wedding was yet another opportunity to test how far she could push. She inserted herself into conversations, dropping sly comments about Danny's closeness with Bill, about Ashley's past with Andre, about Eva's discomfort. Each remark was disguised as casual observation, but her intent was sharper, to remind everyone that she saw more than they thought, that she held the power to expose what they wanted hidden. Eva dreaded the wedding more than anyone. The idea of her mother mingling freely, armed with sharp words and no filter, filled her with anxiety. She feared that what was meant to be Ashley's happiest day would become another battlefield where Leslie planted her chaos. Yet Eva lacked the courage to stop her. She rehearsed conversations in her head, pleas that she never spoke aloud, always silenced by the inevitability of Leslie's wrath. And as the preparations unfolded, Danny's fear for Chelsea intensified. Every time her phone buzzed, her heart leapt with hope that it might be news of her daughter. Every time the screen revealed nothing but silence, that hope curdled into despair. Bill continued his search, throwing himself into every lead, every whisper of possibility, but the trail remained cold. Danny's anguish only deepened, and in that anguish, Bill's presence became the only anchor she had left. The pieces of the Dupri family were scattered, each person carrying a different burden, yet all tied together by threads of secrecy and pain. The wedding loomed ahead, a day marked for celebration, but also a day where everything simmering beneath the surface threatened to erupt. For Ashley, it would be a declaration of love and loyalty. For Jan, it would be a triumph of stability. For Leslie, it would be an arena to feed her hunger for disruption. For Eva, it would be a stage of dread. For Danny and Bill, it would be another test of how long they could balance on the knife's edge of grief and temptation. The gates that surrounded them were not physical, they were emotional, spiritual, invisible walls that trapped them in cycles of love, betrayal, and secrecy. And as each step drew them closer to the wedding, closer to the next fracture, it became clear that no one would walk away untouched. The day of Ashley and Derek's wedding grew closer, and with each passing moment the atmosphere among the Dupri circle became more fragile. What should have been a straightforward celebration of love had turned into a powder keg of suppressed emotions, hidden temptations, and rivalries that threatened to burst into the open. Invitations were sent, flowers ordered, and venues prepared, yet behind the scenes, The family was anything but united. Ashley devoted herself completely to Derek's recovery in the days leading up to the ceremony. She arranged for his rehabilitation exercises, adjusted her own schedule to meet his needs, and reassured him when his frustration grew too heavy. For Derek, who hated showing weakness, the injury was more than physical, it was a challenge to his pride. He often lashed out in bitterness, resenting the way his body betrayed him. Ashley, however, absorbed his anger with patience. She reminded him gently that love was not measured by strength or independence but by standing together in weakness as much as in health. Her conviction impressed Jan deeply. Watching her daughter move through the chaos with resolve filled her with a quiet pride. Jan had feared that Ashley's indecision would always make her vulnerable to heartbreak, but seeing her fight for Derek gave Jan hope that the next generation might finally break free from the pattern of impulsive mistakes that had plagued the Dupris. Jan became heavily involved in wedding planning, pouring her energy into every detail: flowers, menus, music, as if perfecting the ceremony might guard her family from the imperfections of life. But even Jan could not block out the tension radiating from other corners of the family. Leslie's intrusions had reached a new intensity. She had begun treating every conversation as an opportunity to undermine or provoke. At dinner gatherings, she made sly remarks about Danny and Bill's closeness, framing them as innocent observations while knowing full well the impact her words carried. "It's touching," she would say with a smile too sharp to be sincere, "how Bill never leaves Danny's side these days." Almost as if Haley should be the jealous one. Eva, mortified by her mother's behavior, tried to intercept these moments, changing topics quickly or excusing herself to create distractions. But Leslie could not be deterred. She seemed almost addicted to the discomfort she caused, delighting in the way faces tightened and eyes averted when her barbs landed. For Leslie, the wedding preparations were not about unity but about exposing cracks, reminding everyone that happiness was always precarious. Eva's private shame deepened. She felt the burden of her mother's choices more heavily than ever, certain that people looked at her as if she were complicit. She began avoiding gatherings altogether, spending long hours alone and wrestling with the question of whether she should distance herself permanently from her mother. Yet loyalty chained her. For all of Leslie's cruelty and recklessness, she was still Eva's mother, and Eva could not bring herself to abandon her. That conflict hollowed her, making her quieter, more withdrawn, until she felt invisible even within her own family. Meanwhile, Danny's struggle consumed her every waking moment. The absence of Chelsea gnawed at her soul, leaving her restless, sleepless, haunted by visions of her daughter crying out for help. She grew thinner, paler, her spirit unraveling. Bill became her anchor, the one person who could still pull her back from the brink. But their closeness grew dangerous. Every time Bill held her when the grief overwhelmed her, every time his hand brushed against hers, the boundary between comfort and desire thinned. Bill knew he was walking a dangerous path. His loyalty to Haley should have been enough to restrain him. He began to wonder whether he had ever truly been seen by Haley in the way Danny seemed to see him now: raw, human, capable of both strength and fragility. Danny never spoke aloud, the temptation pressing between them, but it lingered in their silences, in the way her eyes held his a second too long, in the way their conversations dipped into confessions too intimate for friends. The wedding became a looming deadline for both of them. Bill knew he had to set boundaries before something irreversible happened, but he also knew that Danny would need him at Ashley's ceremony. Danny feared breaking apart in front of the family, feared letting her sorrow eclipse her daughter's joy. She told Bill she could not face it alone, and he promised, without hesitation, that he would stand by her side. Neither acknowledged what that promise truly meant. On the eve of the wedding, tension reached its peak. Ashley and Derek rehearsed their vows in private, Ashley's hands trembling as she repeated the words she had chosen. Derek, though still weak, looked at her with a tenderness that silenced every doubt. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice heavy with emotion. "Not just from this injury, but from myself. I don't deserve you, but I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I do." Ashley kissed his forehead, fighting back tears. For her, there was no turning back now. Elsewhere, Leslie plotted her entrance. She had no intention of letting the wedding pass quietly. In her mind, The event was a stage, and she had a role to play: a disruptor, a truth-teller, a woman unafraid of scandal. She rehearsed barbed remarks she might unleash during the reception, already imagining the ripple of shock that would follow. Eva, sensing her mother's intentions, begged her to restrain herself. "Please, just for one day, let it be about Ashley and Derek," she pleaded. Leslie only laughed, brushing off her daughter's fears as weakness. "If the Dupris want peace," she said, "they should stop pretending they're saints." The day arrived, and with it came an uneasy blend of celebration and dread. Guests gathered, smiling and exchanging polite words, but beneath the surface every Dupri carried their own storm. Jan busied herself with last-minute details, fussing over decorations and making sure the ceremony proceeded flawlessly. Ashley, radiant in her gown, tried to quiet the nerves twisting inside her, determined to focus only on Derek and the vows they would share. But Dani could not hide her despair. Though she wore a carefully chosen dress and forced polite smiles, her eyes revealed her torment. Bill stayed close, his presence steady, but his proximity did not go unnoticed. Leslie's smirk grew each time she caught them together, her silence more threatening than her words. Eva, terrified of what her mother might do, hovered near her like a shadow, praying that restraint would prevail. The ceremony began, and for a brief moment the chaos receded. Ashley walked toward Derek with Jan at her side, the music swelling as tears filled the eyes of those watching. For that brief, sacred moment, love seemed to triumph over everything else. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, and when Ashley and Derek sealed their promises with a kiss, the room erupted in applause. Yet even as joy spread, unease lingered. Dani's gaze drifted to Bill, her heart aching with secrets she could not confess. Leslie's eyes darted between them, waiting for the perfect moment to unleash her poison. Eva trembled, wishing she could silence her mother before disaster struck. And in the shadows of Dani's heart, Chelsea's absence was a wound that no celebration could heal. As the reception began, conversations grew louder, wine flowed freely, and laughter echoed through the hall. But the undercurrent of tension thickened, winding around every table like smoke. It was only a matter of time before someone broke the fragile peace, and when that happened, the consequences would ripple far beyond the wedding day. The Dupri family had gathered to celebrate love, but what lingered beneath the surface was more dangerous than any of them dared admit. The night was young, the secrets were many, and the gates that bound them all together were slowly, inexorably, closing in. The wedding reception carried on deep into the evening, with music and chatter filling the decorated hall. Yet the air around the Dupri family remained charged with tension, as if everyone instinctively knew the joy of the occasion was balancing on a knife's edge. For a while, Ashley and Derek basked in their union, taking photos, greeting guests, and dancing slowly in the center of the floor. Their love glowed visibly, and for many it was the one pure thing the family had left to hold on to. But purity did not last long. Leslie, wine glass in hand, grew bolder with every sip. She circled tables like a predator, slipping in sharp remarks dressed as jokes, poking at Bill and Dani's closeness, mocking Eva's nervous silence, and casting doubts on whether Derek was strong enough to build a life with Ashley. Eva begged her mother in whispers to stop, but Leslie laughed and brushed her off, claiming she was only telling truths no one else dares to. Each barb spread discomfort, and murmurs began to ripple across the room. Bill tried to keep Dani calm as she grew restless, torn between celebrating Ashley's milestone and spiraling into the abyss of Chelsea's absence. The haunting mystery of what had happened to her daughter did not vanish simply because vows had been exchanged and champagne poured. Dani excused herself from the table at one point, stepping out into the cool night air, her hands shaking. Bill followed moments later, finding her staring into the darkness as if expecting Chelsea to emerge from the shadows. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder, whispering, "We'll find her, I promise." Dani turned toward him, her eyes wet with grief, and for a fleeting second, temptation flared between them, the kind of moment that could destroy everything if either of them leaned into it. But before words could be spoken, the sound of Leslie's voice inside the hall shattered the fragile moment. Leslie had chosen her stage. She stood in the center of the reception, glass raised, announcing loudly that she had a toast to give. Jan's face blanched as she realized what was coming. "To Ashley and Derek," Leslie began, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "May your marriage be happier than the quiet little affairs hiding in plain sight around us." Gasps followed, the room going silent. All eyes shifted instinctively toward Danny and Bill, who had just stepped back into view. Jan rushed forward, trying to intervene, hissing Leslie's name in warning. But Leslie pressed on, emboldened by the attention. "Why should we all pretend? Secrets only fester when we bury them. And isn't family about honesty?" she sneered. Eva grabbed her mother's arm, pleading with her to stop, tears forming in her eyes. Yet Leslie shook her off, unapologetic, almost radiant in her chaos. Danny froze, her heart pounding, realizing the suspicion Leslie was sowing. Bill stepped closer to shield her, his voice firm as he told Leslie she had gone too far. For a moment, it looked as though the scene would erupt into a shouting match, but Jan's voice finally cut through. With uncharacteristic steel, she demanded that Leslie leave at once. The authority in her tone shocked even Leslie, who stumbled slightly at the command. For the first time in years, Jan's patience had snapped, and she would not allow her daughter's wedding to be ruined by one woman's bitterness. Leslie stormed out, Eva chasing after her with apologies trailing behind. The room slowly recovered, though whispers lingered. Danny and Bill sat down again, shaken, desperately trying to appear unaffected. Ashley, despite her joy, could not escape noticing the shadows crossing her family's faces. Derek held her hand, squeezing it, reassuring her that they would not let anyone steal their happiness tonight. She smiled for him, but deep inside she felt the web tightening. As the night wound down, the Dupris parted ways, carrying their private burdens home. Danny returned to her empty house, the silence heavier than ever. She lay awake imagining Chelsea alone, afraid, calling for her. Bill, back with Haley, found himself unable to shake the guilt of almost crossing a line with Danny. Ashley and Derek, though exhausted, began their new life together, clinging to the fragile hope that their love could withstand everything waiting beyond the gates of family chaos. Eva sat beside Leslie in their car, anger and heartbreak bubbling together. "You don't realize what you're doing," she told her mother softly. "You're pushing everyone away. And when there's no one left, not even me, what will you have?" Leslie didn't answer. For once, her silence felt less like defiance and more like a crack in the armor she had so carefully built. In the days that followed, the fallout lingered. Jan worked tirelessly to repair reputations, smoothing over gossip from the wedding. Danny withdrew further, her energy consumed by a gnawing instinct that Chelsea's situation was becoming more dangerous. She began pushing Bill to act, to investigate, to dig deeper no matter the risk. Bill, torn between his loyalty to Haley and his duty to Danny, realized he could not avoid the search much longer. Ashley and Derek, despite the beauty of their wedding, faced their own tests almost immediately. Derek's recovery demanded patience neither of them had expected. Ashley found herself carrying more weight than she imagined, balancing her role as a new wife with the unhealed wounds of her family. Yet she held firm, determined that their union would not crumble. She had chosen Derek, and she would not abandon him. And as for Leslie, whispers spread that she was scheming again, quietly planning her next move. Eva feared what storm her mother would unleash next, especially as Danny and Bill drew closer in their desperation to find Chelsea. The story of the Dupri family was far from over. What began as a celebration had only peeled back the layers of betrayal, temptation, and vengeance waiting to surface. Behind every promise made, there lingered the threat of secrets exposed. The wedding had been the spark, but the true fire reckoning was still to come. And somewhere in the shadows, Chelsea's fate hung like a question mark over them all, the key that could either unite the family and rescue or shatter them forever if the truth of her disappearance tied back to someone within their own circle. The gates were closing, and the Dupris would soon learn that not everyone who stood beside them at the altar or the dinner table was truly an ally. Some carried daggers hidden in their smiles, and others carried hearts too fragile to withstand the betrayal that lay ahead.